Et maintenant, c'est le moment de plonger un peu plus profondément.
You are still listening to Radio Anthropocène from the Literature Lab Festival at the Village Lay, with a little language switch for the next 20 minutes, as we are happy to welcome Jen Carson. Jen Carson, hello.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
You are a writer, the author of several novels, among which the last one, The Rupture, in French, Les Ravissements, have been published this year. Your work has been shortlisted for a lot of prizes, won several of them, and in the article reporting those achievements, you are presented as the emerging voice in Northern Ireland literature. And to begin, I wanted to ask you about that, how Northern Irish literature is sometimes presented as a genre in itself. And a text is Northern Irish before being sci-fi or drama. So in your experience, why is that so?
I think there's a particular kind of voice that comes out of the north of Ireland. We've had a very complex past and a quite complex present as well. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things for writers to grapple with and to write about. And so often the content there's a kind of subtext running through a lot of these plays, novels, pieces of poetry that defines it as Northern Irish. There's also an incredibly healthy, supportive community there. So a lot of us are very proud to be associated with our fellow friends and colleagues who are also Northern Irish writers. But you're right, sometimes it does get a wee bit frustrating. I'm a magical realist and I'm just back from the Caribbean, it was wonderful there to be seen as a magical realist writer, mm-hmm. paired with other magical realists, rather than first and foremost, you're from Belfast, you'll be writing about bombs and shootings and all of that, those kind of things. So I think sometimes the labels can be constrictive, but it's an honour to be part of a community that has mm-hmm. such a rich legacy of writing, but also such an exciting present of writing as well.
So as you said, you're a magical realism author. And why have you chosen this genre? It's which is really similar to folk tales, so the need to have maybe new myth.
I guess I didn't choose to be a magical realist. Yeah. I started writing and then it was actually the poet Sinead Morrissey, thrust a copy of Gunter Grass's The Tin Drum at me and said, "That's you're a magical realist." And suddenly I had a label for what I was. I think I have a lot of imagination, so mm-hmm. to be stuck just in the real world with realism never felt enough for me. I also grew up in a very conservative religious household where the Bible was my primary text, and with absolutely no disrespect, I think the Bible is a magical realist text. It's set in the real world and then weird stuff happens. So that's how I learned to tell stories, and it seems to me quite a natural way to tell stories, that they would be grounded in what we all know, but have the potential to kind of go bigger and bolder and crazier than that as well.
And in your books, there is a lot, I felt like there was a lot of emphasis on children and parenthood. Is that also linked to this kind of magical realism type, or is more a sensibility you have to really emphasize on the experience of children?
I think I'll probably say three things about mm-hmm. that very quickly, if it's okay. First of all, child narrators are an absolute gift for writers. You can get them to ask questions, you can get them to question systems, you can get them to really play with what the reader knows without it seeming overly knowing. So I often employ child narrators to do that as a kind of form of lazy exposition in a way. I think the second thing that I'll say is everyone's been a child. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why there's a lot of literature about childhood. It's one of the few experiences everyone has in common. And I don't know who said it, but a very famous writer said that, you have enough material in the first 10 years of your life to sustain the rest of your writing career. It's where some of your most formative memories come from. Sometimes the seat of trauma. There's a lot of things happen as a child, and I could unpick those for the rest of my life and not run out of stories. And I think the third thing, and probably the more serious reason that I go back to children often, is because of this issue of legacy. In Northern Ireland, 25 years after the peace agreement, we are still looking at the legacy of the trauma and how that's impacted particularly young people. And so the question of what's passed from one generation to the next comes up a lot in my work. And children are a really good way to explore that.
So to go back to what you just said about legacy, in the big moment that we live right now with the Anthropocène, we talk a lot about new generation, future generation, and what we're gonna leave to them. And is this a specific role, in your opinion, of literature in the way we pass on those myths, those tales, those messages?
Yeah, I think in the specific context of Northern Ireland, a lot of our children have been brought up in what is essentially a segregated school system. So 91% of our schools in Northern Ireland are segregated into Protestant or Catholic. So kids are brought up with this very binary way of thinking, us versus them, right versus wrong, black versus white. And I think that storytelling and art does this incredible job of teaching children nuance and empathy, and how to experience someone else's life that's different from yours. And in a context like Northern Ireland, those are incredibly important skills for children to have. You take that with you through the rest of your life. The ability to see that someone might have a different opinion from you or a different experience and not be wrong. So I think that's an absolute important, vital role that art plays in a place like Northern Ireland. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be part of that.
In the first few pages of your last book that I've read in French, so maybe I'm going to misquote it. I'm really sorry about that. Your protagonist, who is a little girl, say that her parents told her to not engage with the world. And how would you encourage children, and not children, people in general, to engage with the world?
Well, I guess that the story of Hannah in the Raptures Le Ravissement is my own story. So that's the advice that I was given growing up by my parents. They were very religious, wanted to keep separate from anything that might defile us or be dangerous or be difficult. And I, with great respect for my parents, that's not the way that I want to live life. And I think the antidote for that, for me, has been people. Just to throw myself into community, to expose myself to people who are different from me, who have different opinions, different worldviews, different life experiences. And that's not always easy. It puts you into some uncomfortable situations, but it also challenges the bias in yourself. And it's how you grow. I think it's how you become a more open person, hopefully a kinder person, and definitely a less fearful person. So I am a big believer in community, and it's one of the reasons you will hear me banging on and on and on about we need to integrate our school system, because if we keep our kids separate from each other, they don't get to meet this wide variety of people who are different from them. And
your work, as we discussed, is really rooted in your life, your experience, your country. You have written 10 novels, and 2 of them have been translated in French. How did it, what is the importance to you to make this really rooted voice heard in different language, different culture?
It is literally the best thing about having your work in translation, getting to see your experience resonate with people in different parts of the world. In the last 3 weeks, I've been in Trinidad, Bulgaria and Greece, and I'm here in France now. And yes, people get to hear about what life is like in Northern Ireland, but I also get to meet writers and readers who have widely different experiences from me. I get to learn what it was like to grow up in Bosnia during the conflict. I get to talk to Ukrainian writers who are living with conflict and exile right now. I get to live with people who have progressed beyond that, or in cultures that are more inclusive and open-minded. I was in France about 3 months ago, and I had the most amazing conversation with some young Muslim French women. And they wanted to talk about how my story of growing up Presbyterian Protestant in Northern Ireland really resonated with them. that is an amazing opportunity to have that. It's such a privilege. And I learn, and hopefully they learn a little bit, and it's great.
And do you think all those experience, those talk, those meeting will influence your future work?
Absolutely. It's one of the most difficult things when you start to be translated and you start to hear from your readers. They're kind of sitting on your shoulder when you start to write, and you know the kind of things they like, and you know the stuff that's going to resonate in places outside of Northern Ireland. So I really need to keep focused on the story as well. The last few years, my writing practice has changed a lot, and I moved from being an everyday writer on the go to someone who more retreats and goes away for a few months to write in isolation. And part of that is trying to get all of the people off my shoulder so I can just tell the story as it needs to be told.
And so we talk about translation, and the title of your last book in French is Les Ravissements, for the rapture, which can also mean the delight, and that's how I understood it at first before reading it. But it's also, so the theme of the book can be quite dark. There is a lot of death, of children death, but it's also quite fun. And what do you think about the importance of humor in face of tragedy?
So I think this idea of dark humour, which is what we Irish writers often get accused of, it's just absolutely like part of Irish culture the whole way through. And I personally think it comes down to hospitality. Irish people are great hosts. We're always trying to put people at ease. So if you get into an elevator with an Irish person, they will try and talk to you. If you come to an Irish person's house, they'll try and feed you, even if you don't want fed. And I think it's the same thing with the humour. If we're going to tell you something dark and difficult, we need to reassure the reader after that. And so often this humour comes in immediately after. Oh, I've just told you that 11 children have died. I better make you laugh now as well. And I think it comes back to this idea of putting people at ease.
So right now, with everything that happened throughout the world, with catastrophe, tragedy, heat wave, do you think we need more, maybe, fun tales to talk about?
I don't know. I think you have to tell a story that you have to tell. And for some people, that will be coming at those big, difficult issues head on. And for me, it feels like I want to come at them slightly slant, you know, with the magical realism, where there's a kind of an amazement and a magical quality to the difficult stuff as well, with the humour, where you're trying to give people a little bit of breathing space to cope with the kind of waves of difficult things that are happening in the world. And I guess also I want to always try and weave in a little bit of hope into my work. The novel begins and ends with a quote from the journalist Lyra McKee, who was murdered in Derry not very long ago, a young woman about 10 years younger than me. And one of the things she said towards the end of her life was, it's not always going to be this bad, things are going to get better. And I wanted to begin and end the story with that, because it's not unrealistic. It's acknowledging that things are difficult now, but there has to be a little kind of window of hope as well. And even in Lyra's death, she achieved so much in bringing people together and uniting our focus, and she left an incredible legacy behind as well. So yeah, I'm a big believer that even in the darkest moments, there are these little moments of hope and opportunity as well.
So do you feel there is kind of a responsibility to bring those things into the world?
I think responsibility is a really heavy word for an artist. An artist's only responsibility is to the creation of art, which is as beautiful and as powerful as they can possibly make it. I personally don't think that I can write in the environment that we have now in 2023 without bringing in both the difficult stuff and also offering my readers some kind of little nugget of, you know what, you could still make a difference. There could still be hope out there. But that's maybe just me. I'm an optimist.
So how would you say the environment, the 2023 environment impact you, the way you write, or maybe the idea you may have for future books?
I guess I think about this a lot, and some of it is just desperate frustration and a real selfishness sometimes. Like, you know, I remember reading an article a while ago and it was called Writing at the End of the World. And that's sometimes what it feels like. Like, why did I have to end up being this generation that's stuck at the end of things when everything is falling apart? In Northern Ireland, we have no arts budget. Our government collapsed over a year ago, so there's no support for artists at the minute. It's really difficult to be an artist over there, and there is a frustration there. But it's also tempered with this thing of goodness, we have a lot to say. And we have a lot to wrestle with. Art, it flourishes in spaces where there's some conflict, something to kind of rage against. And there is a lot to rage against right now.
Yeah, maybe too much. But you, in your work, you also pay a really special attention to words. There is a lot of definitions that are redone in the text. Hannah, the hero of the Rapture, have a little books in which she writes down words. Why do you think words are so important?
I think I'm fascinated with words, and for two reasons. One, when I began to write in Belfast about 20 years ago, there were very few novelists. There were a lot of poets. Mm-hmm. And so I went to lots of poetry readings, and I learned from them about how language needs to sound as well as mean. So I want my sentences to sound wonderful whenever they're spoken aloud or read with the eye. And that's something that's become increasingly important to me, the kind of lyricality of prose. I think the second thing, and I don't know how it translates in France, is I'm from a part of the world where we have a dialect called Ulster Scots, which was the kind of Scots Gaelic words which came over with the settlers from Scotland and merged with English. And that is falling out of fashion, and a lot of those words are being lost. So those words, the Ulster Scots words, are all through Le Ravissement. They're the words that Hannah would have grown up with, and I wanted to put those back into print so they're there because they're precious to me. It's how my granny and my dad spoke, and I don't want them to be lost.
And about the lyricality of words, what's a word like Anthropocène evoke to you?
I don't know. I'm going to be really honest and say that I don't actually know what the word Anthropocène means. Which is probably not what you want to hear when I'm in a conversation with you about it.
Why not? It's such a big word.
I also think
it's a big word with a broad scope, so it's really okay not to know what it means.
But I also think it's really important that writers don't pretend and don't fake their ignorance. I'm fed up with sitting in panels with people pretending they've read things or know things when they don't. So if I don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn something. So you can define Anthropocene for me now.
Oh, well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have that. But basically, Anthropocene will qualify the era that we are in with a lot of climate change issue, a lot of political, social, economical issues. So it's kind of a word to qualify now and what is to come. So that's the idea behind it. And so to finish our discussion, I wanted to ask you if you had some recommendations, some titles of must-have in a perfect Anthropocene library, so a perfect book selection for now and what is to come.
Yeah, I think I'm going to recommend a book by the American writer Catherine Lacey called Pew, P-E-W. It's a very odd, slim little book about a person who appears in a church in a small American, quite religious town. And it's a very clever piece of writing because Lacey doesn't tell us what race the person is, what gender they are, what class background they are. And we see this person through the eyes of all of the folks in the village who project their biases and their prejudices onto them. And I think it's a really good book for questioning the self, because sometimes when we come at these issues around climate change or political situations or conflict, you have yourself on this kind of pedestal of I'm in the right, I'm very intelligent, I know how other people should think about this. And this book really challenges that. It makes you culpable and it makes you question yourself. And it's a great read as well. So Pew by Catherine Lacey.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for your time. Thank you for that discussion. So your books, The Firestarter and The Rapture, are available in French at Sabine Vespizer Éditions. Ce sont donc Les Lanceurs de Feu et les Ravissements aux éditions Sabine Vespizer. Good afternoon, thank you again.
Thank you.
Et bon après-midi à l'écoute de Radio Anthropocène.
Et maintenant, c'est le moment de plonger un peu plus profondément.